For years, John Goodman kept trying to lose weight, and for years, the same thing happened. He'd lose it. I'd then somehow find himself right back where he started. But eventually, something changed. Not his workout. Lambda, not a miracle diet, not some Hollywood celebrity trick. The first major change happened when Goodman decided to stop drinking. Pure. And that decision would become one of the foundations of a transformation that eventually saw him lose roughly 2,000 pounds from his heaviest point. Slumdian. But here's what makes his story different. Everyone can see the weight loss. Bean. Almost nobody saw what had to change before the weight could stay off. MBAT. Because John Goodman wasn't simply trying to become thinner. Balloons. He was trying to break a cycle he'd been trapped in for years. And once you understand that cycle, his transformation becomes much more than a before and after photograph. Plain T problem wasn't just the cereal. At his heaviest, Goodman was reportedly pushing close to cbite pounds. Plend. But the number on the scale wasn't the only problem. The bigger problem was that he already knew how to lose weight. He had done it before. Mond. Goodman has spoken about repeatedly losing significant amounts of weight, only to regain it later. Alind. That meant every successful diet came with the same question. How long can this actually last? And that's a brutal question. Because when you've lost weight before and watched it return, you eventually realize that losing it isn't necessarily the hardest part. The real challenge is changing whatever keeps bringing you back. For Goodman, one of those major factors was alcohol. And in Arsène Lupin, he made a decision that would change the direction of his life. He stopped drinking. Jeans. That wasn't the end of the weight loss journey. It was the beginning of a different one. Bontige d'exclusion, that broke the cycle. Goodman has been unusually open about his relationship with alcohol and his previous attempts to lose weight. Ballant, he described a pattern where he could work hard, lose weight, feel better, and then essentially reward himself by returning to drinking, and that created a vicious cycle. Lose the weight, celebrate, return to old habits, regain the weight, start again. Bellind. But once Goodman stopped drinking, one of the biggest pieces of that cycle was gone. And that created room for something else to change. His food. Because cutting alcohol wasn't going to magically erase decades of unhealthy habits. Gleans. He still had to deal with the everyday choices that happened 3 times a day. And that's where his transformation became much less glamorous, but much more effective. MDTSER was no secret Hollywood diet. If you're expecting a celebrity weight loss story involving some unbelievable diet, this isn't it. Goodman's approach was much more ordinary, and that's exactly why it worked. Bombing with guidance from health coach Mackie Shilstone, Goodman changed the way he ate, including moving toward a Mediterranean-style diet. Fish, vegetables, nuts, better overall food choices. He also focused on controlling portions and cutting back on sugar. Nothing about that sounds revolutionary, but think about the difference between finding a diet that can make you lose weight and finding a way of eating you can actually continue. MLD. Goodman wasn't trying to survive on an extreme plan for a few weeks. Mulder. He was trying to stop repeating the same mistakes. And that meant the food had to become part of a lifestyle rather than another temporary challenge. But there was still another piece missing. His body had to move. Ambient. Age. I didn't need to become a Vesitus model. Goodman's exercise routine wasn't built around becoming a professional athlete. He found ways to stay active that could fit into his real life. Walking became part of his routine. So did boxing, and that distinction matters, because extreme exercise can produce dramatic results, but dramatic isn't always sustainable. Goodman needed something he could keep doing. Walking his dogs was simple. Walking gave him something more engaging. And gradually, activity became normal instead of something he had to force himself to do. The result wasn't immediate. Lend. But that's exactly the point. There was no single morning when Goodman woke up and suddenly looked completely different. The change accumulated, and eventually the number on the scale became impossible to ignore. Then the weight loss became massive. Goodman's transformation eventually reached a level that surprised even people who had been following his career for decades. Gene reports have placed his total weight loss at roughly 200 pounds from his peak. That's an enormous change. But there's something important about that number. It didn't happen overnight. And it wasn't the result of one magic decision. The alcohol was gone. His eating habits changed. Abandius. His portions became more controlled. Sugar was reduced. He became more active. And the changes continued long enough to produce a completely different result. Gleaned. That's why the real story isn't when John Goodman lost 200 pounds. Ambandi. The real story is, John Goodman stopped doing the things that repeatedly made him regain the weight. And that distinction changes every. Liamed. The hardest part came after the weight came off. Here's something most celebrity transformation stories skip. Ain dant. What happens after the before and after photo? Because losing weight gives you a result, maintaining it requires a routine. And Goodman already knew what it felt like to lose weight, and then watch it return. So this time, the goal couldn't simply be getting smaller. He needed the new habits to become normal. That meant continuing to watch portions, continuing to make better food choices, continuing to move. And continuing to stay away from the behavior that had repeatedly pulled him back. That's much harder than following a diet for a few months. There is no finish line, no final day. No moment where you can say, yo, I've done it, now I can go back. LNDA. Because going back was the problem in the first place. And this is where Goodman's transformation stopped being about weight loss and became about maintenance. Team BN, people, finally, saw DE resultant. The transformation had been happening for years before. The public reaction became enormous. But eventually, Goodman started appearing in public looking dramatically different. In 2023, his appearance at the Monte Carlo Television Festival generated widespread attention. Then in 2025, he appeared at the Smurfs premiere and once again attracted attention for how much his appearance had changed. And that's when the internet did what it always does. It focused on the picture. John Goodman looks unrecognizable. But the photograph was only the final frame of a much longer story. The audience saw the slimmer face. The dramatically different body. What they didn't see were the years behind it. And the decision in 2007, the food changes, the walking, the boxing, the discipline, and the fact that Goodman had to keep doing those things long after the initial excitement disappeared. Lamtichi real turning point wasn't the 200 padouts. This is the part that matters most. John Goodman's biggest transformation wasn't the moment he lost 100 pounds. It wasn't the moment he reached approximately 200 pounds down. And it wasn't even the moment everyone finally noticed. The real turning point happened when he stopped treating weight loss as something he could repeatedly start and stop. He had already proven he could lose weight. The new challenge was making sure he didn't have to keep losing it again. And quitting alcohol was a major part of that shift. It removed one of the habits connected to his old cycle. Then the food changed. Then the activity changed. And gradually the entire routine changed. That is why his story is more interesting than a simple celebrity transformation. The body changed because the lifestyle changed first. That's why this time lasted. There's a huge difference between I need to lose weight tween I need to lose weight. Beyond, I can't keep living this way. The first statement is about a number, the second is about a life. And Goodman eventually moved toward the second. He wasn't chasing a temporary result. Bland, he was building habits that could continue after the weight was gone. Cons. That's why the story didn't end when the scale dropped. It continued through the years afterward. PLDS. Because the real test wasn't whether Goodman could become thinner, mondier. It was whether the old version of his lifestyle would eventually come back. And so far, the transformation has endured far longer than one celebrity diet cycle. Blend. That's what makes those recent photographs so striking. They're not showing the beginning of his transformation. Pleens. They're showing what happened when the transformation actually stuck. What the photo can't show you, what the photo can't show you. Look at a recent photo of John Goodman, and it's easy to focus on the obvious. Veined. He looks dramatically slimmer. His face is different. His overall appearance has changed. But none of that photograph tells you what made it possible. You can't see sobriety. Lambed, you can't see portion control. You can't see every walk. You can't see the boxing sessions. Land. You can't see the moments when returning to an old habit would have been easier. Cruno. And you certainly can't see the years of consistency behind the result. Leaned. That's why calling this simply a 200-pound weight loss story misses the most interesting part. MD Bulina. The weight was the visible result. The lifestyle change was the invisible cause. So, what was the secret? Kang. After hearing all of this, you might still want one simple answer. What was John Goodman's secret? Land. The answer is almost disappointingly simple. There wasn't one. There was a turning point. Banned. Then there were hundreds of decisions that followed it. He stopped drinking. He changed his diet. He reduced sugar. He controlled portions, he became more active, and most importantly, he kept going. Blend. That's why the transformation didn't depend on one perfect month. LBD. It depended on making the new routine his normal routine. And maybe that's the part people should pay the most attention to, because a shortcut can help you lose weight. Spamined. But it can't automatically teach you how to live differently afterward. Moaned. Goodman's story suggests that the lasting change came from solving the second problem, not just the how do I lose it? But how do I make sure I never have to start over? And TEs a razy to position, Curban C transas. Mayan. Behind the transformation. Today, when people see John Goodman, they see a dramatically different actor from the one they remember decades ago. Cleaned, but the most impressive part isn't simply the number, it's the timeline. Years have passed. Mend, the transformation wasn't dependent on a short-term challenge, and that's why his story has become so compelling. Mand, Goodman didn't wake up one morning and become a completely different person. He made one major decision, then another. Beamed, then another, and eventually those decisions became a lifestyle. Bleamed. That's how nearly 200 pounds can disappear without the story being about a miracle. It's about consistency. Lens, but not the boring kind. The kind that changes what your normal day looks like. And that's the real lesson hidden behind the photographs. Emblend, Tishi final, turning point. Maybe that's why the best way to describe John Goodman's transformation isn't, So, he lost 200 pounds. Brond, it's this. He stopped rebuilding the life that made him gain it back. The alcohol stopped, the eating changed, movement increased, and instead of treating those changes like a temporary punishment, he kept them long enough for them to become part of his identity. Belanda. That's why the transformation still matters years later. Anyone can have a dramatic before and after. The difficult part is waking up years later, and still living differently. audience. So when you see John Goodman today, you're not just looking at a smaller version of the actor audiences grew up watching. Lan Jiu. You're looking at the result of a decision that started long before the photographs went viral. Ben's a decision to stop starting over, and perhaps that's the most important part of his entire journey. Bonda John Goodman didn't just change his weight, he changed the lifestyle that had kept bringing the weight back. And that is why, after all these years, the transformation still looks so extraordinary.